So the motto at Georgetown Law is law is but the means, justice is the end. You know, that's been our motto since our inception. If you go to our library and you walk in, those are the words over the door. And so that's a commitment that's at our core. And nowhere is the need for justice greater than when it comes to preserving and protecting one of the most important rights offered to us in a democracy, the right to vote. Now, there has never been a voting rights institute like the one we're creating at Georgetown Law. And I think as everyone in this room knows, we've never needed one more. In a time of intense concern for and scrutiny of voting rights, the Institute will develop innovative legal and policy solutions that protect the right to vote, and we will train the next generation of lawyers and leaders. Now, all of these things, the protection of important rights, collaboration, innovation, education, and informing policy development on some of the major challenges of our time, these are at the heart of what we do at Georgetown Law. Our centers and institutes, while doing groundbreaking work, also serve as conveners of critical discussions. So we bring together experts from Washington, D.C., across the country and around the world for thoughtful engagement on major issues like climate change, privacy and technology, global health, human rights, poverty and equality, national security, and more. And we want Georgetown Law to be seen as the center for nonpartisan analysis and constructive engagement on a wide range of policy issues. So we're particularly proud of this moment because the Voting Rights Institute will add an exciting new dimension to that vision of Georgetown Law. Now, the Institute will offer opportunities for students, recent graduates, and fellows to engage in litigation and policy work in the field of voting rights and to educate attorneys about the skills and best practices of voting rights advocates. The Institute will use to the fullest advantage Georgetown Law's top-ranked clinical program. Our Civil Rights Clinic is a division of the Institute for Public Representation, a public interest law firm and law school clinic founded in 1971. We represented clients in litigation involving discrimination and constitutional rights, workplace fairness, and open government. As a result of our creation of the Voting Rights Institute, IPR's Civil Rights Clinic is expanding its work into the area of voting rights. Now, students currently enrolled in the Civil Rights Clinic have already started working on several cases and matters identified by the Campaign Legal Center and the American Constitution Society. For example, students are drafting an amicus brief for a Voting Rights Act case on appeal, as well as researching and developing a potential case under the National Voter Registration Act. The Civil Rights Clinic, in partnership with the Institute, has also hired a clinical fellow to help supervise the student work in the area of voting rights and build that part of the clinic's docket. The fellow will work on ensuring that clinic students have a meaningful experience working on voting rights litigation that, in the spirit of the Institute's purpose, will inspire them to continue as voting right advocates after law school. He will also work with the Institute in developing and providing future Institute trainings. We further entered into an agreement with our partners that will create fellowship opportunities for recent graduates working on an extensive voting rights database to inform attorneys as well as the public. And we're working to secure continued support for the future development of the Institute. Now, last Friday at the law school, we teamed up with the American Constitution Society and the Campaign Legal Center to host a voting rights litigation training at Georgetown Law for lawyers interested in these issues. And we brought together an extraordinary team of practitioners who discussed recent and pending Supreme Court cases in the area, the status of voting rights legislation in Congress, and more. And then students from our IPR Civil Rights Division also attended the training, which was immensely valuable to them. So, in fact, Jerry Hebert, who helped lead the event, which was fascinating, and Paul Smith, a partner at Jenner and Block, who's one of the panelists. They're among our great adjunct faculty. They co-teach an election law practicum at Georgetown Law, one in which students participate in a weekly seminar while working on a project dealing with election law issues. Paul is also a member of the board of directors of the American Constitution Society. So I think you get a sense of, how this partnership is really at the core of our mission, how it's helping us advance our idea of engagement with the great issues of the day, and how it's really helping prepare a generation of lawyers who are going to go out and engage in this kind of litigation and make a profound difference. So we're so proud. It's really, I can't tell you, this is my 6th year as dean at Georgetown Law. I've never been prouder of a moment than this moment right now. From our Law Center's campus near Capitol Hill, we think there cannot be a better platform for convening, teaching, and catalyzing changes on these important issues. So I just want to thank you. It's great. Whenever you have an event, you always wonder, will there be anybody there? And then when you look out and you say, it's raining and there may be a hurricane coming, then you really are worried about whether there's going to be anybody there. To come to this room and to see it filled, and to see the people who are here, I just want to thank everybody who's here and everybody we've been working with for joining us today and for your support of the Voting Rights Institute. So thank you all. Thank you all. And I look forward to this project. And now let me turn matters over to Caroline Fredrickson, President of the American Constitution Society and our partner.
Well, thank you so much, Dean Treanor. I have to echo your words and say that for me as well, this is an incredibly special moment. I've been at ACS now for well over 6 years, and we've done some amazing work and we've had some wonderful partnerships, but this is really an incredibly meaningful moment in our launch of the new stage of our Voting Rights Institute with Georgetown Law School. So I want to thank you for joining us in this endeavor that the Campaign Legal Center and ACS have embarked on now for several years. So this Voting Rights Institute, and I have to say with Jerry was such a fundamental instigator of this. We've been talking about from the kernel of an idea well before the Shelby County case was decided. We have been talking about the need to increase the number of lawyers and the capacity for litigating voting rights cases, even before the Supreme Court decided to take one of the most meaningful provisions out of the Voting Rights Act, essentially, and make it so much harder to protect voting rights. But even before that, we knew that we needed more capacity. So let me just say, for those of you who may not know ACS, we were founded in 2001. We are a national network of lawyers, law students, judges, and policymakers who believe that the law should be a force to improve the lives of all people. And the Voting Rights Institute is so consistent with that mission. So as I think everyone in this room knows, in 2013, Shelby County versus Holder greatly reduced the effectiveness of the Voting Rights Act by gutting the provision that gave the federal government the power to stop discriminatory voting procedures in their tracks. When the Supreme Court issued that decision, Justice Ginsburg wrote an incredibly powerful dissent, which is rather relevant to our discussion today and to where we are today with the approaching hurricane. Because she said throwing out preclearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet. Well, I will tell you, the Voting Rights Institute now is giving us, maybe not the umbrella, but we've got the rain boots, the raincoats, the sandbags. We are prepared to do everything we can to ensure that what remains of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2 particularly, will be as robustly defended as possible. So, as I mentioned earlier, ACS and the Campaign Legal Center have been working together both pre and post the Shelby County decision, but especially post Shelby, to marshal the resources against the flood, or one might say the hurricane of state and local laws, voter ID laws, limits on early voting, redistricting plans that have been aimed to restrict the right to vote primarily for minorities. And since that time, together we have conducted numerous Voting Rights Institute trainings. The Dean referenced the most recent one at Georgetown Law, but we have done them across the country, and we have trained hundreds of lawyers. We have done this in partnership with the best litigators in the country from the most significant civil rights groups who have participated in leading our trainings to make sure that the members of ACS and others who have joined those trainings across the country are getting the best instruction they possibly can. The strength of ACS, really, and why we have such a great partnership with the Campaign Legal Center, is we do have a network. And our ability to galvanize our network to work together on the most pressing legal issues of our time. So today we are so proud to announce that we are taking the Voting Rights Institute to a new level with the partnership of Georgetown Law. And Jerry Hebert from the Campaign Legal Center is going to go into further detail, but I do want to just say that, as the Dean mentioned, this partnership is going to significantly increase our ability to provide our legal experts with more up-to-date information to help them better defend the rights of voters. Will it strengthen our ability to train more litigators in fighting voting restrictions by providing access to and training about the best practices and use of other tools. Our collaboration will also enable more and more people to be informed of their rights through our interactive website, to find vital information about their voting rights and opportunities, and to ask for help in overcoming burdens to their right to vote. As I think we all in this room agree, voting rights are integral to a strong democracy. But our democracy is being harmed by lawmakers around the country who are motivated by partisan politics and who want to limit access to the ballot box for our most vulnerable voters and minority voters across the country. They argue that they are protecting the integrity of elections from in-person voter fraud. But Justin Levitt, who's been a law professor and a faculty advisor for ACS, who is now the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the Department of Justice, he wrote in an ACS issue brief that in-person voter fraud is almost non-existent. In fact, UFO sightings are far more frequent in this country than acts of impersonation at the polls. So we all know that what they're really trying to do when they talk about protecting the integrity of our elections is meaning protecting the integrity of our elections from having people we don't want to vote. That is what is really going on. So I am proud to stand up here with the Campaign Legal Center, with Georgetown Law, and thank the many supporters who have come today to witness this launch, as well as those who've given us financial support to get us here, to make it possible for us to expand the Voting Rights Institute and make more effective the work that we've done to help protect voting rights. So I want to thank you so much for coming, and I want to introduce my dear friend and collaborator, Jerry Hebert.
Well, thank you, Caroline and Dean Treanor, for those remarks. I will say that this day was a long time in coming. It started actually as almost a dare by my wife Victoria, because we were trying a case in 2011 in San Antonio, and she looked around and she said, "You're one of the youngest people actually trying to enforce voting rights, and you ought to get busy training the next generation of voting rights lawyers." And I took her seriously, as a serious spouse would do. And I'm happy to say my wife Victoria is here today. And the VR, her maiden name was Roberts. She's now Hebert, but Victoria Roberts Institute, really, it could be, because it was your inspiration that got us here. I do want to thank Dean Treanor, Dean Treanor for those introductory remarks. Since 1994, I've been on the faculty at Georgetown, and I have to say that the people at Georgetown, the faculty, the deans, and the students, a number of whom are here, are among the very best that I've ever had the privilege to be associated with. The law school is first rate, and the students, even though I end up teaching the cases that I worked on when I was in the Justice Department, they amaze me by pointing out things in my cases that I hadn't seen before. So that speaks a lot. In addition, Vice Dean Aiken and Assistant Dean Vicky Arroyo, thank you for your leadership in getting the collaboration done and the memorandum of understanding that we have. At ACS, Caroline Fredrickson, a great partner, Zach, Gima, and Jill Dash, who's not here today, a new mom. You've been wonderful partners from day one, and thank you for all you've done to get us here today. You know, it's in a time of intense concern for and scrutiny of voting rights in the country. The Institute, as you've heard, is going to develop innovative policy and legal solutions that protect the right to vote. And we will make Georgetown a bigger place of thoughtful engagement on all voting rights issues in the days ahead. It is already the hub of thoughtful engagement on so many issues, and I'm proud to be adding voting rights to that list. As Dean Treanor said, students at Georgetown are already working on voting rights cases with the Voting Rights Institute. Patrick Llewellyn is here. He's the clinical fellow Dean Treanor met. Patrick, you're right here. Thrilled to have him working with the students. Mike Kirkpatrick, faculty member at Georgetown, also running that clinic. So thank you both for your work on these voting rights cases. It's been exciting already. And we at ACS and CLC, Campaign Legal Center, will continue to work with the students and faculty at Georgetown on collaborating on voting rights cases in the days ahead. I also, of course, have to thank the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation also, because without their financial support, and they actually were the ones who really gave us the impetus. And one of the things that I've learned in my, when I wear my funding hat, is if the MacArthur Foundation funds you, everybody else will fund you. You know, it's like you build it, they will come, because they are a foundation that does the due diligence on who they give grants to and make sure that the dollars that they are investing are going to be used wisely. I do want to particularly thank one person at MacArthur who actually is here, Elspeth Revere. Elspeth is sitting right here at the Campaign Legal Center table, and I have to say, Elspeth, you have been 25 years at the MacArthur Foundation. You're leaving this year to go on to, I know, bigger and better things, but I will say that you are, in my opinion, all the democracy things that you have funded and led and inspired. You have more vision, and you are truly a great American hero, and I thank you very much. We're honoring Elspeth later today, and I'm thrilled to be a part of that. Your colleagues at the MacArthur Foundation, Tara Magner and Lauren Pabst, have been wonderful to work with as we are transitioning, and we are really grateful for their encouragement and support. But you know, as I say, other foundations stepped up. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Ben Shute and Keisha Gaskins have been with us from day one, supporting us. That's been a wonderful partnership. The Mertz Gilmore Foundation in New York, Jay Beckner, Wallace Global Foundation with Allison Barlow, Ford Foundation gave us some money for one of our trainings. So we are really thrilled that we have had these partners. I know Karen Narasaki is here, who has been a longtime supporter of voting rights and a friend of mine for quite a number of years. I will say that Karen is one of those people in the voting rights community who's a real visionary, and she has been very much encouraging us in this effort. Caroline have met with her a number of times, and every time she had an idea that we should pursue, it worked out for us. So thank you for all the support you've given us as well. So, as Caroline has noted, we need support in 2020 2012 to 2015 to train the next generation of voting rights lawyers and law students. And we've been able to do that. We've been, up to now, been able to connect legal resources with victims of voting discrimination. We've worked with pro bono partners in big firms here in town, actually, and across the country, to have them connected to either organizations looking for legal help or filing an amicus brief in the Supreme Court of the United States. And today's launch does take us to a whole new level. The Voting Rights Institute is going to have three main focuses, and Dean Treanor and Caroline have highlighted two of them. A Voting Rights Institute at Georgetown Law that, as the Dean said, provides opportunities for students and recent graduates and fellows to actually engage in voting rights litigation. And, you know, the law school education these days is first year you learn a lot about theory and principles, and then second year and third year you get to apply those principles in practicum courses. And it's been terrific to engage with students at Georgetown who are looking to actually get their hands dirty in voting rights cases. And the clinic with ACS and CLC directly involved will help provide and identify legal counsel to work with students at Georgetown's legal counsels, provide strategic advice, identify cases, and also through the practicum course that Paul Smith and I teach, we'll work in partnership with them on cases that are pending in the courts. We've committed to establish this first ever Voting Rights Institute at Georgetown Law, and every time I say it, I want to pinch myself, making it the place, as the Dean said, to study voting rights and learn how to combat voting rights litigation. Caroline has outlined ACS's vast network of lawyers and law students, which we've tapped into in conducting our trainings nationwide to educate attorneys and stimulate interest within the legal profession. I want to tell you about another aspect, the third aspect, not just the trainings that we've done and not just the VRI at Georgetown. We're building a dynamic website, the three of us, that will launch in a few weeks. And the website provides, as a litigator, somebody who spent a lot of time at the Justice Department, 20+ years litigating voting rights cases, and then having spent now 20 more outside the Justice Department to litigate voting rights cases. The one thing that has always been frustrating to me as a litigator is the fact that there's no one-stop shopping where you can get a lot of information that is really designed for people who want to enforce and litigate voting rights cases. So I thought that after talking with all the voting rights groups and civil rights groups that I could find and who I've been dealing with over so many years and talking to their people, that we talked about a website that would best serve all of us in the voting rights community. And so that's what we've done. And I just want to show you in a few minutes a couple of the slides that from that website, which will be up and running live in a couple of weeks. Working with those allies, I think what we've come up with is a pretty state-of-the-art voting rights technology that will enable voters and lawyers and others to not only report problems that with respect to voting rights, but will provide opportunities and platforms for scholars conducting research and gathering data on voting rights issues. And speaking of scholars, I know we have a number of them in the room, but I want to highlight two of them who are here who've worked with me on voting rights cases, two expert witnesses, Dr. Alan Lichtman and Dr. Peyton McCrary, who happen to be sitting next to each other. That's the way experts are. And they have been, they're nationally known in this area. Dr. McCrary over with the Justice Department's voting section as their historian, has testified in a number of cases. And I just want to thank you both. You're not only scholars in the field, but you're close, dear friends of mine, and I appreciate you being here today. So why is a Voting Rights Institute needed? Well, before Shelby County, as Caroline said, the right to vote in places with a long history of discrimination was largely protected by the Voting Rights Act's preclearance provisions. No voting change to an election law could take effect until a state or local government could prove that that voting change was non-discriminatory in purpose and effect. The burden of proof was on the state or the local government, and Shelby County changed all that. Today, to stop voting changes from going into effect that are discriminatory, litigation is the only way victims can do that. And that's a burden that's both time-consuming and costly. But there was something else lost when the Supreme Court decided Shelby County that has kind of slipped under the radar, and that is information. Community activists and people in the community, when there was a voting change and the state or local government had to go to the Justice Department to get approval, they had to identify people in the minority community who could be contacted about that voting change so they would know about it and they could weigh in on whether it was discriminatory. That was lost. In addition, those community activists could also find out why the local government or the state government was proposing to do the change, because they had to demonstrate to the Justice Department why they were doing it and why it was not discriminatory. That was all lost. So that too is why we now have a public portal on our website, which I think will be valuable to all Americans who want information about what's happening in their community. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. Now, in the past few years, a number of states have enacted new obstacles to people registering and voting, reversing our nation's long struggle to expand voting rights opportunities and participation. You know, when I started doing voting rights cases 4 decades ago, I engaged in litigation over vote denial cases. People were being denied the right to vote. And we kind of solved most of those problems and moved into what I would call a next generation of vote dilution cases, where we went after structural problems with election systems. Now we see we're back into the denial cases with photo ID cases, canceling people's right to cast ballots in early voting, things like that. There was really a veritable rush to vote suppression litigation in 2012. Current Supreme Court doctrine gives the states broad leeway to enact voting restrictions, but the recent epidemic of restrictions on voters shows a need, I think, to re-examine the meager constitutional protections that voters have. Since 2010, 21 states have passed new voter restrictions. 21, that's almost half our states. And unsurprisingly, these restrictions have reduced the number of eligible voters and have put a special burden on poor people and minority people. For example, in Texas, a case that I litigated and I'm still litigating, a photo ID law enacted in 2011 in Texas and mired in litigation ever since, was found to disenfranchise more than 600,000 registered voters in Texas. Nearly 5% of the people registered to vote. The group disproportionately affected, of course, was African Americans and Latinos. In 2013, North Carolina, immediately after Shelby County came down and Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act got gutted, North Carolina passed legislation eliminating 1 week of early voting and abolishing same-day voter registration, which again had a disproportionate impact on minorities. In Florida, just to give one more example, a 2011 law would have imposed strict financial and criminal sanctions for groups wanting to do voter registration that failed to pre-register and fill out forms with the state. They had each volunteer sign a sworn affidavit subjecting the volunteer to strict, harsh financial, criminal, and penalties. And if they didn't account for all forms that they had taken to register voters issued to the organization and submit monthly updates on registration, even if they hadn't undertaken any efforts, they could be fined and prosecuted. Federal judges actually in Florida, we had to go to court, and voting rights litigants did, and twice federal judges blocked those laws in Florida from going into effect. And just yesterday, I was sad to read that it was reported that the state of Alabama, which most recently adopted a photo ID law, announced that it would stop issuing driver's licenses in counties where 75% of registered voters are black. Terrible. So the Voting Rights Institute is going to start and has already populated its website with nationwide data, and we will coordinate with civil rights and voting rights organizations to shed light on what's going on in your community, so that information that was lost as a result of Shelby County will be identified. And we will be able to get also from people out in the field through the interactive website, basically, what on-the-ground perspective they have. We will also monitor state and local websites, news articles identifying voting changes that are happening. We will collect and report those from local sources to Voting Rights Institute trained attorneys if there appear to be problems, and other legal experts as appropriate. And thereby helping groups, because we're all stretched so thin in the voting rights community because there's simply more work and cases than we have people to do them, we will fill those gaps in current data collection, dissemination of information, and recruitment of trained advocates and volunteers who can protect voting rights out in our world. I mentioned the Voting Rights Institute's public portal will also provide voters an opportunity to find legal representation to protect voting rights directly, a process which does not exist anywhere in the voting rights community right now. Voters can report their issues through an online intake complaint form, which will then be reviewed by Voting Rights Institute staff at Georgetown Law, Campaign Legal Center, and ACS, and we will evaluate those complaints, look into them, gather facts, and using those resources raised, we will determine whether there's a violation, and if necessary, pursue litigation or connect Voting Rights Institute trained legal representatives with the complainants. This screening process will be helpful in maximizing the efficiency of the voting rights bar. Let me show you a few slides now that we have. These are mock-up slides of our website. So here is our home page where you see the two big blue bars. One will be for voters, public, the members of the public, or media, or people like that. The other will be for lawyers and experts, resources for voting rights litigation. And you see, we're going to have news articles. We've started to put some up there talking about some of the various cases. Then you'll be able to select your state for news in your state. We'll have a Twitter feed up there. And if you are a member of the public, this is the next page you would go to. If you have a question or complaint, you can request information if that's all you want to do, or you can submit a complaint. You want to find out what's going on in your state, you'll be able to do that, and we have FAQs. By the way, down at the bottom, a very important thing I should point out, we are going to have links to our partners and sponsors in the voting rights community, and we'll be adding those as well, in addition to our 3 organizations. Here is a form, just a typical form that you can fill out, providing your name, information, date of the incident, and a category, nature of the incident that you can click on, and then if you can describe it. And we will have people available to respond to these complaints. This is, again, information that was all lost in Shelby County and which is not being collected today on a real comprehensive, effective way. And there's a calendar of events you can click on. We've got a few up there already. We have actually more than this. Now here's the Lawyers and Experts Resource Center. And I want to spend a minute to talk about that. This particular slide, I think, shows that we have a litigation library as well as litigation opportunities. So when we're looking for lawyers who we've trained who want to volunteer and they're looking for maybe a small case or a large case, we will list the opportunities for them. The library itself is what I want to talk about most, because this is what I mentioned earlier as a litigator of voting rights cases I really wanted to have. So here's a typical litigation library. You've got folders there for all the kinds of voting rights cases, Section 2 suits, non-redistricting cases. Then we've got redistricting cases, which can be Section 2 cases, one person, one vote cases, partisan gerrymandering cases, NVRA cases, HAVA cases, and other voting rights suits, maybe ballot access, for example. And within each of those folders, you'll have subfolders. So we've picked out the very best complaints under Section 2 that we think address a wide variety of issues but are written by experienced voting rights litigators and have really the best examples of those. Motions for temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions, summary judgment, and even more, opinions and orders on those issues, and so on. We have in the litigation library, we'll have an expert witness database. Now, I know this is, if you're a litigator, you're going to start foaming at the mouth over this next one. We have gathered the expert witness publications, CVs, reports filed in cases, depositions, and trial transcripts of every expert to testify in a voting rights case in the last 20 years. How about that? And I should highlight the people at the Campaign Legal Center table, Harry, Tim, and Nate, who are 3 of the people who've been helping me do that, along with a bunch of other summer interns we had, but through your hard work, that's becoming a reality. So as you can see, this is really a robust website, and the key beneficiaries of the Voting Rights Institute are going to be numerous. Voters, who now are going to have access to information and legal resources protecting their voting rights. Georgetown law students are going to benefit by getting hands-on practical experience and training in the field of voting rights by experienced litigators in voting rights cases working within and outside the Institute. Lawyers and community activists who need access to current voting information, legal resources and data, and who need training, frankly, in the complex, ever-changing world of voting rights law. And then voting rights and civil rights organizations, of course, who face increasing demands on their limited resources to engage in voting rights enforcement. And then finally, I suppose members of the media will be able to access the public part. The lawyers and experts part, that will be password protected, and we will screen people and only allow those people in who are not engaged in vote suppression tactics, but who have demonstrated a commitment to voter advocacy tactics. And I will screen them, so I know who you are. Having 42 years of doing it. We are creating a first-of-its-kind comprehensive Voting Rights Institute. You know, as it's been said, no right is more precious than the right to vote. And we have committed our 3 organizations and institutions to doing everything we can to create an enduring, effective Voting Rights Institute that will be a legacy to all of those who have dedicated their lives, and in some cases, given their lives for the right to vote. Former Texas State Senator Wendy Davis has been a part of the Voting Rights Institute already, having served as a panelist at one of our trainings that held earlier this year in Austin at the Student Convention. And if you think this room was packed, in Austin there were 200 people, I think, in the room for that training. It was wonderful. And Wendy draws a crowd wherever she goes, and rightfully so, because she is another genuine American hero, somebody with tremendous courage and commitment to equality and justice for all. I'm proud to know her and call her a friend. In addition, as you may know, when Texas tried to divide her Senate district 5 ways to harm her near majority minority constituents, who were roughly half the people in her district, she saw firsthand, I think, the importance of a legal counsel needed to protect voting rights. And it's now my distinct honor and privilege to present to you our guest speaker, former Texas Senator Wendy Davis.
Thank you all so very much. I cannot even begin to tell you how thrilled I am to have been invited to be a part of this event and to hear about the extraordinary partnership that these 3 organizations have created. It gives us an opportunity, of course, to talk about the current vulnerability of one of our most sacred of constitutionally protected freedoms, and that, of course, the right to speak through one's vote. What we have seen in states like mine, from federal courts in both Corpus Christi and DC, have come findings that the Texas legislature had engaged in intentional discriminatory efforts to disenfranchise minority voters through the drawing of electoral maps to dilute their voices, as well as through the passage of a voter ID law designed to silence the voices of low-income, mostly minority voters. In Texas, as Jerry mentioned, and even the state admitted, the courts found that an estimated 600,000 registered voters lost their ability to exercise one of their most precious of constitutional freedoms, the right to express their voices at the ballot box. And I have to tell you, as a candidate in 2014, when that law was actually in place for the very first time, I sure as hell could have used those 600,000 votes. And I say that, of course, in part to poke fun at myself, but there is a compelling and sobering reality there, too. Because obviously, having no vote means having no voice. For 2 decades, understanding the destiny that Texas' changing demography would ultimately bring about, Republican lawmakers there decided that rather than shaping their policies to reflect the concerns of the shifting demographic, the better route would be to simply shut these folks out of the political process and therefore shut them up. through the cracking and packing of minority voters in hyper-gerrymandered districts, Republican lawmakers have assured that minority voices will be largely muted. Texas lawmakers now feel they have the freedom to thrust headlong into right-wing ideological policymaking as a consequence of silencing those voices. This is all made possible because they no longer feel that they will be held accountable to folks at the ballot box for their actions. In the wake of 2 decades of Republican redistricting and the enforcement of the state's new voter ID law, Texas has seen its legislature move from a bipartisan body to one that is increasingly run by the furthest of the right of the Republican Party. Evidence of that comes from actions in this most recent legislative session, and there are so many examples I could give you, but I'll start and end with just one. Thanks to them, you can now openly carry a handgun in Texas, and you can carry guns on a public university campus. You can even use your concealed handgun permit as an ID to vote, but you cannot use your Texas University ID. People here in Washington often focus on what is happening at the federal level, but states like Texas prove the point that when voter access gets squeezed through state laws designed to silence the voices of a segment of its citizenry, bad policies follow. Those who have worked hard to make the Voting Rights Institute a reality understand why the fight that we bring to the table on voting rights matters so very much. Everything else follows from that. And where that ship is not righted, policymaking in state legislatures like those in Texas will increasingly reflect the ideologies of a primary voter whose priorities are reflective of a minority of our citizens. I have seen firsthand what a difference trained voting right litigators can make in protecting voting rights. I stood with Jerry Hebert and Chad Dunn, who was here earlier but had to catch a flight, and joined by Luis Vera with LULAC, to successfully fight against lawmakers' attempts to carve up the minority voices in my district. We fought an uphill battle because, believe it or not, the Obama Justice Department failed to meet their responsibility to join us to protect the voting rights of African Americans and Latinos who had formed a coalition in my district to elect me as their chosen senator. Before the lawyers got involved, we had strategic predicate work that was laid by the work of the Lone Star Project, and their executive director, Matt Engel, is here, and I want to make sure and recognize Matt. Matt not only made sure that we laid an appropriate record in Senate hearings and on the Senate floor so that lawyers like Jerry and Luis could lay out a successful case, but he also helped us to draw all of our alternative maps that were entered into evidence and that helped create a very robust and strong evidentiary argument before the court. And thanks to Matt and Jerry and Chad and Luis, and mostly so many people from the district that I had the privilege of representing who came to provide testimony to form that record, we sailed through some really strong winds. And we did not give up even when the Obama Justice Department weighed in against us. We held the rudder true, and we overcame great odds, winning a victory for my constituents. As a consequence of that, I was able to escape electoral demise in my 2012 Senate re-election campaign because that unbelievably strong minority voter coalition once again re-elected me to serve them. So Jerry and Matt and Luis and Chad, either I have them to thank or to blame for the fact that about 2 years ago I found myself being fitted for a catheter in the early morning hours of June 25th. I rushed out of my door that morning of my apartment with a pair of running shoes in my hand, a pair of shoes that would come to represent the power of what it means to stand for our beliefs. And when I travel the country now, inevitably, someone will look down at my feet and say, "Where are your pink shoes?" Those shoes, like those worn by women every day in this country, tell a story about who I am, just as did the well-worn pair of pumps with the nails protruding through the heels that I wore as a young single mom working 2 jobs to get by. Just as did the shoes that my 15-year-old grandmother wore as she rode across the Texas Panhandle holding the first of her 14 children in her lap, sturdy, low-heeled leather lace-ups that she had borrowed from her mother to get married in when she was only 13. Or the story that my own mother's white orthopedic shoes told of her when she was a single mom responsible for 4 children working in a low-wage fast food restaurant job. Those remarkable women, my grandmother and my mother, like so many grandmothers and mothers in this country today, slipped on or laced up their shoes fixed on a singular purpose: to create a better opportunity for themselves, for their children, than they each had. So when I think about the battles that we are engaged in fighting today, including the fight about voting rights, I find myself thinking about the people who are behind all of those fights. The people who get us out of bed each morning, even when we've been knocked down the day before, because we know that they are worth fighting for. I think about their shoes, and I think about the need for us to put our feet into them. People whose shoes we need to stand in and whose voting rights we need to protect. So I commend all of you for creating this institute and for recognizing that the cause of justice can be best served by protecting the most important of our fundamental rights, the right to vote. Let's remember as we leave this place today that behind all of our lofty ideals and arguments are people. Their cause has been and remains our cause too. As a great president from my home state of Texas said when he signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, "This right to vote is the basic right without which all others are meaningless. It gives people as individuals, control over their own destinies." President Johnson then specifically addressed Black citizens of our nation, saying, "You must register, you must vote, you must learn so your choices advance your interests and the interests of our beloved nation. Your future and your children's future depend on it, and I don't believe that you are going to let them down." Well, the Voting Rights Institute is going to make sure that they're not let down either. In that same spirit of commitment to our democracy, I know those of you who have made this institute a reality will give your best efforts and not let them down. It is an unfortunate reality that 50 years after the original Voting Rights Act was passed, our nation still desperately needs a Voting Rights Institute. I am thrilled to see these 3 great institutions come together to join forces, and I know everyone in this room will closely follow their work in the days ahead. We cannot stop our pursuit of justice so that one day Americans of every race and color and origin in this country have the same right as all others to share in our democracy. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this historic occasion, and best wishes as the incredible work of these 3 organizations continues in a combined and more powerful way. Thank you.
So I just want to thank you all once again for coming, and it's awfully hard, especially with the head cold, to follow Wendy. But what a wonderful and invigorating call to action for all of us. I just wanted to see if we had any questions in the room before everybody runs off to. Well, it's not raining, so you might want to run off now before it rains again. But you might have some questions, so I want to. Yes.
And I don't know if Jerry, the website. Now, is that going to be free to the public and to the
Yeah, it will be. Well, so as Jerry explained, there are two. There's both a public site, which is as free as any other website, where voters can go, people can go and find out information about news stories or to ask questions if something has happened in their voting area, like a polling place has been moved, or there's been some other change proposed and they want to know if that's an issue, then they can raise the questions through the complaint form that's available. But it's lots of information for the public. And then there's this password protected page or set of materials that's available only for the lawyers that we have pre-screened, so that they'll have access to all these wonderful materials that have been produced by the top litigators in the country.
So lawyers, if they want to get involved and start helping, in order to use a website, then they need to be pre-screened.
Yes, that's right. And for many of them will have participated at some point in our trainings that we have held and will be continuing to hold. But anyone who's interested, who wants to start participating, let us know. And we'd love to bring you in. But this is primarily a resource for people who are engaged already in voting litigation, and we'll give them tools to, as Jerry said, it's a fast-changing area of the law, and there are very many clever legislators out there, unfortunately, who've come up with a whole variety of devious ways to deny the right to vote, and so we have to adapt new theories and new approaches, and so we'll be constantly a growing set of materials. So, yes, sir in the back. Well, we'll have a whole mix of materials, and we want to make people aware of everything that's out there. But I think one of the main interests is to make sure that people who are litigating these cases have access to the best experts on the particular issue. But doing opposition research, we'll be doing that too. Absolutely. In the back, and then, yes, you, and then we'll take you in the green.
I'm someone who wants to volunteer in one or another capacity. Who is the right person to talk to, it wasn't a way to volunteer?
Well, you can talk to Zach Gima over here with ACS, or Jerry, or any of us. Shoot us an email. We're looking for people to participate. We're very excited about the response, I have to say. It's been... and you had a question. Well, we would like to do as many trainings as we can, and we hope to do partnerships, especially with some of the historically black colleges and universities. It would be a great place for us. We are looking into those kinds of opportunities now. So yes, absolutely. We have done trainings at law schools already. New York Law School was hosted us for a training, and we'll be looking for more opportunities. But it's a very good question, and yes, very much so. We want to instigate as much interest and participation in fighting restrictions on the right to vote as we can around the country. Any more questions? If not, then I want to get, oh, there is a question back there.
One quick question on the legal stuff. Do you also, in line with the question before about sort of the opposition expert reports, do you have the pleadings that the other sides have done so that you kind of, because they're going to change as we change.
As I said, we'll be doing the opposition research as much as we can and have as much of those materials available as we can possibly accumulate. So those are very important points, and absolutely, we got to know what they're up to if we want to defeat them. So, anyone else? No? And I just want to reiterate once again, a great thank you to Georgetown Law, to our wonderful partners there. It's been really an incredible pleasure working with you. And with the Campaign Legal Center and Jerry Hebert and his colleagues and my folks at ACS who've just been doing a great job pulling all this together. So I want to thank all of you and the tremendous support we've gotten from the foundations that Jerry has mentioned. And we will be looking to make this a permanent and everlasting until, you know, we don't need it anymore, but we anticipate unfortunately for quite some time. So we will be continuing to build resources to make this a permanent institution that will enable Americans to know that their rights to vote will be protected going forward. So anyway, thank you all for coming, and stay dry.